This session or this webinar is really rooted in capabilities that we've added to VantagePoint over the past couple of years that allow us to look at groups of documents basically based on count and year differences, as well as our ability to apply statistical analysis and so forth. And so we thought it would be a good idea to revisit this and talk about how this functionality can work within the context of developing indicators. And, as title goes, company resources by way of indicators, looking at the company or a group of companies' technology focus and overall impact. And through this presentation, I'll do a brief demonstration as well. We're taking the idea of looking at a collection of companies and measuring them based on a number of different indicators that I'll be talking about. By indicators, what do I mean? I'll get into that a little bit, just talk about that. But then go through our typical refine, analyze, report area of the tool, but focus on how to build indicators based on counting information. How many documents, number of inventors, a document's number of IPC. They're numbers, but they, cumulative sense, they can be used to measure relative elements between documents, between companies, have collections of documents and so forth. In the analyze area, we're able to look at time differences and trends. We're able to develop indicators that actually measure different elements based on the matrix capability. In the analyze areas where the statistical functionality is found. And also our formula builder, being able to just demonstrate how to normalize citation rates based on the age of the portfolio or age of the documents. We're going to use this to then apply that within certain functions or capabilities within the reporting area of VantagePoint, demonstrating on scatter plots using count information, and then how you can take this data and put it into a profile table and then export that into Excel, develop that further in your third-party Tableau or whatever capabilities outside of the tool. So what do I mean by indicators? So on the left, just what are we indicating? And on the right, the fields that will explore count elements and look at date ranges based on type of indicator or what are we looking at? When you think about an invention that has 10 inventors, a company is spending a lot of money paying those people to develop their ideas. So versus an invention with one or two inventors. So there's that. And we are, we're extrapolating here, and it's not complete 100%, but it's a leader, it's an indicator. And likewise, you look at the number of variation of IPC codes or CPC codes or mesh terms or whatever classifications that a data provider has added to the data. Those can be measured as well to see variations. The inventive features, the technology focus, this is a patent kind of focused presentation of, the number of claims that a patent has can be indicative of a possible how broad the invention is and so forth, or I should say how features are on the particular document. And then looking at the number of words in the first claim. In the world of intellectual property, a patent with smaller number of words and claims basically indicates a broader patent. That can be a measure as well. This innovative impact going, as we all know, looking at citations. I'm not going to get into self-citations or not, but there are ways to eliminate those as well. But in any event, the more information the more a document is cited, the more possible impact it might be having on future developments. And then the age of the document is relevant. How long the patent is being enforced. Sometimes people don't enforce their patents for their full 20-year time span, but we're just going to be looking at just kind of the assumption of 20 years. And then normalizing that, as I mentioned earlier, using our formula builder. So these are just some of the indicators that we'll be looking at using the functions within the VantagePoint. I wanted to think in terms of counts. So if you look at a record, there are 4 inventors on this record. Think about a portfolio and all of the inventions of a company. And across that, looking at the counts of different number of inventors of all that data, the number of these IPCs, the number of subclasses, the number of claims, and then also the fact that it is 2 years old and so forth. These are all fields that are built within the data, and we'll go through and build some of these fields just to show you the technique. Counts are found within the refine area of our VantagePoint ribbon over little hidden over here, counts per record. And so we'll be playing around with that. This is just giving a sense of what I've done kind of pre-work. We're going to work this up a little bit as we go along, but counts, claims counts, there's the 54 different numbers of claims counts. And what do I mean by that? But we're going to be looking at basically where this information comes from. Sometimes the data providers provide count information. Sometimes you have to do it through that counting terms per record. Just to illustrate, this is a typical list. It's based on claims count. So interpreting this, there are 444 records in the data that have 20 claims, which is not surprising for those of you that may not be that familiar with claims. The patent office starts charging you more if you go over 20 claims. People tend to stop at 20, and that's indicative of this counting. So there's 76 with 15. But if you go down here, there are 24 records in this data with 24 claims. So they vary a lot. And this counting related to entities within the data can be comparatively interesting. If you look at the inventor, mostly in this data, there are between 1 and 4 inventors per patent. These are the number of documents. But, we have patents down here that show 14 inventors, 19 inventors. And so, these outliers are maybe indicative, and we're going to play around with that with a scatter plot and kind of help illustrate that in comparison to that. And then lastly, IPCs. Again, just the number of records. So if you think about it, these things stand out. There's 16 IPCs and 37 records. So these are the things that we'll be working with when we start doing, working up the data in VantagePoint. So that's counting data. Let's look at, patent terms, or how old really it's the age of the document. There's a lot of date information within patent data. I'm not going to get into it, but we're just focusing on in this presentation, the grant information, and just making the assumption of the 20 years from the priority filing date. Now, within the Analyze tab, you can go over to the statistics area. You can click on date difference, and it'll pull up this dialog. And you'll notice that I want to look at each document. I'll look at the priority date of each document. And I want to know the number of years between yesterday and the priority date on each document. And so that can calculate, and you can see the options we have here, months, weeks, days. But the end result is here. Some people are scratching your head. How do you get 0? Because I'm rounding it up to years. So some of these are even less than a year. And I'd have to look them up through to make sure that, that makes sense. But here we have, this is roughly the age of most of the innovations within this data set, which, by the way, when we go through and look at VantagePoint and look at some of this data in a demonstration, I searched AI in the context of reading X-rays or doing medical diagnostics. So it seems to be a very hot area. And when you search that, there's a lot of documentation that is relatively recent. And it can be pretty interesting just watching the key players. Going through that, using a matrix to kind of highlight that. So these are the entities that I'm looking at. And I'm focusing on the primary entities within this data. But also, as you're probably aware of grouping, we can make groups and add that. I have all the universities in this data. And I also have, if you look down here, I call them individuals, but inventors. There's really only 2 patents in this data. A lot of them were non-patent applications. But again, you'll notice the year time span of these records, they are hitting around the 4 to 9 years, and they all kind of group within that area. Some outliers, we have 21 years here. That's we can look at to see is that for real. Siemens has been looking at imaging and AI or machine learning 21 years ago. And that's what the beauty of VantagePoint, being able to look at that document and drill down and see if this is indeed for real, either through the detail windows or the actual document through the title window. Statistical Insights is a very useful function, and it just allows us to, again, compare those, what I call my target group of tinees, and looking at the inventor counts, just coming up with the statistics around that. And the statistics table allows you to look at what is the average number of inventors per document within the portfolio. What is the maximum number of inventors within the portfolio, and then the minimum and the mean. We have this box whisker plot, just kind of showing you the variation in the portfolio. The other thing that you're able to do with the statistics capability is build for, quartiles. If we do that, what a quartile is basically grouping the data, the average, in this case, this is inventors, into 4 groups, and then representing it on the target data, the target assignee data into quartiles, so that it just gives you a better way of analyzing this, and this can be taken further into analysis and so on. And we're developing this. This is kind of early stage. We're hoping to get other plots of this data just to show this information in a more graphical way. And then taking this a little further, how do we normalize citation? The numbers here, if you look at it, there are a lot of citations that look at Siemens. I believe Google stands out as well. There's one document in Google that has most of the citations, but I want to look at this based on an age-related type of relationship. Some of these portfolios are very old, some of them are relatively new, and you can do that through the custom indicator builder capability. When we pull that up, you'll be able to then build your own formulas based on division, subtraction, and so forth through the operator. And what I've done is basically come up with an indicator that I'm going to save called Normalized Tech Impact. And I'm going to look at the forward citations, and I'm going to divide them by the year element that I identified, basically how whole the document is. And when you calculate that, you end up with this additional standardization that can help you get a better understanding. This is sorted. Basically, this sorted, you can get a sense of, even though Siemens is fairly high, it's lower down on the list, whereas we have these HeartFlow, relatively smaller, but standardized in terms of the age of the patent. It comes up very, very high in the list. This is just another way of using our calculator capability. Looking at counts and dates, using the Gantt chart capability, which is over in the report function, you can begin to identify entry into the technology that you're analyzing, the early entry, but also in this case, it's not, except down here, the individuals, they're actually going strong. Sometimes you see, as you see in the indicators, for whatever reason, there are no more publications after a certain date. So individuals, lack of resources, or maybe they're just working on the information that they have and not developing it further, or maybe it's been adopted or licensed. I don't know. But again, you're just seeing here how early entry comparative for all of these different entities helps you understand who might have the controlling technology. Scatter plot. This is a fascinating analysis, in general capability analysis. We're looking at the number of IPCs, just the counts per document, and then the counts of inventors. And this HeartFlow company seemed to be dedicating a lot of resources, between 5 and 6 inventors per document, to develop their technologies, which representative very high number of IPCs. Individuals, not so much so. They're probably simpler inventions and so forth. And then you have this whole collection of comparison between the different companies. The profile table, just we'll briefly get into that, but the profile table is something that really gives you a ability to pick and choose what you would like to compare. In this case, we're looking at the average citations. We're looking at the average counts, claim counts. We're looking at the average inventors and the maximum number of inventors per document. So you can use the profile table to mix and match these elements, and then you can also export that into an Excel table. So that's kind of the sense of what I want to get to here. And just let me briefly just jump over and start demonstrating this. So first of all, setting up your analysis, you're counting fields. And if I go over to the refine area, a lot of different providers in patent world provide count information. So that's one thing that you might want to do. Just look through if they're not already imported by virtue of our import filter, you may have to look to see if they're held back. And you'll notice here, and I'm just going to hold down the control key here. Here's claims count. Here we have independent claims count, just going down here, just picking these as they go along. Do I see any further, any more? I'm not going to really look at word counts at this time, but you'll notice we have word counts here, so forth, so on. So that's pretty much what we'll just add to the system. So we'll just add those fields and just give it a second to add. You'll notice that it didn't count inventor, didn't count IPCs and so forth. But right now, and I identified these in a filter by looking at basically account information. So this is the data that I've pretty much pulled from the information that the import filter has provided us. If I look at this, you'll notice so many documents with 3 independent claims. In this case, there's one document with 28, which is kind of huge. And you'll notice if I go over here, and by the way, forgive me, I need to get in the habit of enlarging these lists. And over here, I can enlarge this as well. Magic Leaf Incorporated. We can look at that and see, is that real? The beauty of VantagePoint, allowing us to really make sure our data is consistent and correct. But if I go back over and just close this out, I also want to count other information like the inventor information. So I've cleaned the inventor data. I'm just going to pick the inventor's clean, and this is the new name of the field, and it will give us this data. And again, we illustrated that where we showed that within the presentation. Going back over, if I go through and what's another IPCs, C's, and I'm going to basically count the IPC information. I'm also going to count the subclass information. So IPC subclass information, just count that as well. So this gives us a nice starting point for our analysis, just the counts of these fields. But this could be applied obviously to any field. So just jumping back and going into how you deal with data information. So if you go to the Analyze tab, you'll notice the area called Calculate, and you'll see under Statistics the ability to look at different elements. But I want to look at date differences. And what are we going to do? We're going to choose a field, and we're going to calculate the number of years from whatever date is in that field. In this case, I'm going to look at the earliest priority, and I'm going to choose, and it defaults to today's date. And this is going to be the name of the new field, and it's going to basically calculate that for me. Just looking that through. And here we go with the information. So many records are 5 years old since filing, 6 years old, and so forth. So this is the information that we can use to do some of our analysis. And with that, let's look at ways to represent these counts. I had shown you the matrix. If I do a co-occurrence matrix of my target companies or target entities, and let's look at the age information. So it's right at the top here. I'm going to pick that and then run it. Now, I did a little further workup of the data. And the one thing that is frustrating in analysis is that long tail of smaller entities that somehow you want to keep within your data. And with grouping capability within VantagePoint, you can do that. And I basically grouped, and there's quite a bit, which is indicative of a newer technology. If you think about it, newer technologies tend to have a variety and a large number of different individuals, smaller companies trying to go after a newer technology, get their foothold. And then you have, the larger Siemens, but you also can see the universities in operation here. I've collected all the universities. And then also down here, I have my inventors as well, my individuals. So this is really representative of the entire analysis. And I can sort this and just kind of begin to look at the ranges and who's entered this data. Or I could go over and look at it. We looked at that Gantt chart. Let's look at the Gantt chart. I've worked up my target assignees, and I'm going to pick publication year and compare it to the priority year, and then identify that information and just go through and show you how to build that out. Had we not looked at the smaller portfolios, we would have missed the possible elements within the data or companies that Siemens might want to be aware of, that they've entered into filing into this area of technology much earlier. And so that's just something to be aware of. This functionality, that those smaller entities, keeping that in your data is very important. So let's now look at the statistical capabilities. If we bring out the statistic dialog, we're going to, again, this is always looking at these portfolio comparisons, my target companies, and then the numeric fields. And we can pick and choose, doesn't matter, because once this is developed, we can pick any of these on the fly and refresh the data. So let's just start with claims count and run that through. And so now we see the sum, the average, and so forth of the information with respect to claims count. But if I wanted to, I'm interested in my inventor information. There are 15 inventors. That's interesting, finding those 15 inventors. And looking at that, and typical, here are the 70 documents. But if I wanted to find those 15 inventors, I can actually just do that through looking for I'm going to look for my counts, my key information, my inventors count information. Here's my 15, and then I can open that up and look at that information just to see what exactly this is and so on. So that's again, one thing that I love about this application, VantagePoint application. This is our statistics capability, the drop down of all the number fields, and each one of these you can export this table out to Excel. But what about the concept that I had talked about, standardizing the information, normalizing the information with respect to citation data? Here's our forward citation information here. Look, do we have it? Oh, look at that. I do not see forward citation counts. Well, easily rectified. If we go over to look at forward citations, let's look at this, generate that. And so, if I sort this, look at that. There is a document with a lot of forward citations. Who is it? Oh, lo and behold, it's Google. Now, if I jump back, I think I go back to that table. I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to rebuild this, but it's not a big deal. Just really, if I go over to the statistics tab, look at my target companies, and then pull out any of those statistics table, and we go with forward citation counts this time, just build that right away. And here we have it. But this doesn't account for the age of the documents. And a newer document that has a lot of citations versus a 20-year-old document that has the same number of citations, the impact is diluted by the time. So let's go into our builder here. We're calling this the custom indicator formula builder, and go through and build one. So if I go in with sum, and you'll notice here we can basically use all of these things that we're trying to explore and offer additional functions in terms of just canned indicators that you'll notice I have quite a few already built here. And that's the beauty of this. Once you build these, you can make them into templates. But we're going to basically look at the sum of, first of all, we're going to take the forward citations and we're going to basically divide that, pick the operator, and then build out the citation information. This helps you understand the total overall, just calculating it. Things are operating as you would expect. So if I run that calculation, I'm just going to click new, click OK, and you'll see. So I sort this. Lo and behold, who comes to the top but Heartflow. Heartflow seem to be operating very aggressively, and I'm curious to see how they match up with the other companies in a graphic sense. And we can do that with a cluster chart. So let's run that, and that's over in our report area. And let's run a scatter plot, not a cluster, but scatter plot. Look at the target companies, look at the count information for inventors, and look at the averages for that, and then look at the IPC count information and the averages for that, and then finally publication year. We're looking at the relative investment, Heartflow, number of inventors, seems to be a fairly large team, but also the complexity of the information, like for like, versus Fujifilm, just 2 inventors, but also, half the complexity based on basically counts. So this is just allowing you to see this as well. So that's using the scatter plot and then the profile table. Let's just quickly build out a profile table. And I'm going to start with my target company, and click OK. I like this function. It just allows me to visualize how the table is going to work and start adding columns. And we're going to do statistics, and we're going to look at our count field. So let's look at the claims counts, and let's look at the average and add that. Let's add another one. Let's look at the statistics around comparing inventor counts, and let's look at the average again and compare that. And then let's add, just for time's sake, let's look at the statistics and look at the IPCs, the subclasses, or let's look at the counts of the IPCs and the average. So this can be built out fairly well, just taking advantage of the statistics function within the profile table and then exporting this to Excel. There we are, like magic.